Somewhere over the ancient city of Isfahan, a city with a history stretching back more than 2,000 years, a city that UNESCO has called one of the greatest architectural treasures on Earth, the sky turned orange. It wasn't a natural fire. It wasn't an accident. It was the deliberate result of American B-2 stealth bombers dropping 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs on an Iranian ammunition depot, and it was filmed and posted on Truth Social by the President of the United States. Let that sink in for a second. We are now living in a world where the United States is at war with Iran, openly, officially, with fighter jets and bunker busters, and a 5-week military campaign called Operation Epic Fury. And the president is sharing footage of it like it's a highlight reel. This is not a drill. This is not a movie. This is not a simulation. As of today, March 31st, 2026, the United States and Israel are engaged in the most significant joint military operation in the history of their alliance. Strikes have hit Tehran, strikes have hit Isfahan. Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, a man who ruled his country for 35 years, is dead, killed in a targeted strike on his compound in late February. Iran has fired hundreds of ballistic missiles at Israel. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes every single day, has been strangled. Oil prices have broken $100 a barrel for the first time since 2022, and the question hanging over every foreign ministry, every stock exchange, every military headquarters in the world right now is, where does this end? Today, we are going deep. We are going to walk through everything. How we got here, what is happening right now on the ground, what the stakes are for the world economy, what diplomacy looks like when one side keeps extending deadlines and the other keeps firing missiles, and what this all means for you, regardless of where you're watching this from. Stay with me. This is going to be one of the most important explainers you watch this year. To understand what is happening right now, you have to understand the long road that brought us to this point, and it did not begin in February 2026. It did not even begin when Donald Trump returned to the White House in January 2025. This conflict has roots that go back decades, but let us start at the modern beginning, the moment that set the current chain of events in motion. On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched its devastating surprise attack on southern Israel. Over 200 Israelis were killed, about 250 were taken hostage. The world was shocked. Israel declared war, and the Middle East, which had been moving toward normalization through the Abraham Accords, lurched back into crisis. Iran-backed militias immediately activated. Hezbollah began firing rockets from Lebanon. The Houthis in Yemen started targeting commercial shipping in the Red Sea. Iranian proxies in Iraq and Syria attacked American bases. The entire region became a pressure cooker. Throughout 2024, Iran and Israel traded direct missile and drone strikes for the first time in history. Iran launched over 300 drones and missiles at Israel in April 2024, almost all intercepted. Israel struck back. The two countries, which had long fought through proxies, were suddenly in a near-direct confrontation. Meanwhile, the Trump administration returned to power in January 2025 with a very clear policy position on Iran: maximum pressure. No more diplomatic softness. Iran would either make a nuclear deal that satisfied America's demands, complete dismantlement of its enrichment program, or face consequences. In June 2025, everything accelerated. After months of failed nuclear talks, Israel launched what became known as the 12-day war against Iran. American B-2 bombers joined the strikes, dropping the largest bunker buster bombs ever used in combat, 14 GBU 57 massive ordnance penetrators, in Iran's underground nuclear facilities at Fordo and Natanz. The Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center was also hit. The strikes severely damaged Iran's nuclear program, but Pentagon analysts were clear it was set back, not eliminated. Iran still had enriched uranium stockpiles, it still had the knowledge, and its leadership vowed to rebuild. Then, in late December 2025, something extraordinary happened. Massive nationwide protests erupted across Iran, the largest since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Fueled by economic collapse, a crumbling rial, and soaring prices, millions of Iranians took to the streets in more than 100 cities. They weren't just protesting policy, they were calling for regime change. The Iranian government's response was brutal. Estimates of those killed range from the regime's own admission of over 3,000 to credible independent assessments of more than 36,000 dead. 36,000 people. The scale of that violence hardened positions on all sides. President Trump warned Iran that if it shot peaceful protesters, the United States would intervene. Iran did not stop. Diplomatic talks in Oman and Geneva went nowhere. By January 2026, Trump announced that a, quote, massive armada was heading to Iran. The fuse had been lit. February 28, 2026. In the early hours of the morning, coordinated U.S. and Israeli strikes began across Iran. The Americans called their operation Epic Fury. The Israelis called theirs Operation Roaring Lion. Together they represented the most significant joint military action in the history of the U.S.-Israel alliance. The first phase was described by military analysts as a decapitation and degradation campaign. It went after four things simultaneously: Iran's senior leadership, its missile production facilities, its naval assets, and what remained of its nuclear infrastructure. Within hours of the first strikes, reports emerged of a strike on Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's compound in Tehran. By morning, his death was confirmed. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the man who had ruled Iran since 1989, who had guided its nuclear ambitions and its proxy networks across the Middle East for 3.5 decades, was gone. The significance of this cannot be overstated. Killing a sitting head of state, even one designated as a state sponsor of terrorism, is an event without modern precedent for the United States. It sent shockwaves not just through Tehran, but through every capital in the world. Iran did not hesitate. Within hours, it launched a massive retaliatory wave. Approximately 125 ballistic missiles were fired at Israel. Drones and missiles targeted American military facilities across the region, in Bahrain, Qatar, Jordan, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. A drone hit the U.S. consulate in Dubai. An explosion rocked Erbil, Iraq. Iran also moved to weaponize its most powerful economic lever, the Strait of Hormuz. By blockading the strait, Iran threatened to strangle roughly 20% of global oil supplies. The effects were immediate. Oil prices spiked, global markets wobbled, insurance rates for commercial shipping through the Gulf skyrocketed. The White House released what it called the full objectives of Operation Epic Fury. First, prevent Iran from ever acquiring a nuclear weapon. Second, destroy its ballistic missile arsenal and production capacity. Third, degrade and sever its proxy networks, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and others. Fourth, annihilate Iran's navy. And fifth, the unstated but implied objective, regime change. In an 8-minute video posted to Truth Social, President Trump told the Iranian people directly, "Take over your government." He called on IRGC soldiers to lay down their arms, warning that refusal would mean, in his words, certain death. This was not diplomatic language. This was the language of total war. It has now been more than 5 weeks since the opening salvos of Operation Epic Fury, and the picture on the ground is extraordinarily complex, a mixture of military action, diplomatic back-channeling, economic pressure, and domestic politics on multiple sides. Just this week, the latest escalation came from Isfahan. American forces, using 2,000-pound bunker-buster bombs, struck an Iranian ammunition depot just outside the city. The president released footage of the destruction, massive fireballs rising into the night sky, on Truth Social. A U.S. official confirmed to the Wall Street Journal that a, quote, high volume of penetrator munitions was used, causing secondary explosions that sent shockwaves across the region. Isfahan is not just a military target. It is a city of 2 million people. It is home to UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Strikes on or near the city have already damaged the Naqshi Jahan Square, the Chehel Satun Pavilion, the Shah Mosque, and the Jame Mosque. Blue Shield International, the cultural equivalent of the Red Cross, has called the damage to these protected sites a war crime. The Strait of Hormuz is, without exaggeration, the most strategically important waterway on the planet. It is roughly 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Through it passes approximately 21 million barrels of oil per day, about 20 to 21% of all petroleum traded globally. Saudi oil, Emirati oil, Kuwaiti oil, Qatari natural gas. It all moves through that narrow channel. Iran has effectively been blockading it since the war began. Not completely. Some ships from countries it considers neutral or friendly have been allowed through. Turkey got one ship through. India has negotiated passage for a few vessels. A Chinese sailor on a Panamanian-flagged ship recently told NPR that his vessel carrying industrial methanol had passed through. But for the most part, the strait has been closed for business. The effects on global energy markets have been severe. U.S. crude oil has broken $100 a barrel for the first time since 2022. Consumers from Germany to Japan to Pakistan are feeling it at the pump. This week, Iran's parliament approved a plan to impose tolls on ships transiting the strait, a move that would effectively institutionalize Iranian sovereignty over an international waterway. That is a demand the United States has explicitly said it will not accept. While the world's attention is focused on Iran, there is a parallel conflict playing out in southern Lebanon. Israel has expanded its ground operations against Hezbollah, with the IDF reporting the killing of dozens of militants in recent days. But the cost is real. 4 additional Israeli soldiers were killed this week alone, bringing the total killed in Lebanon since this phase of operations began to at least 10. Iran has continued its ballistic missile attacks against Israel, 2 waves targeting central Israel overnight, and 2 cluster munition strikes against Tel Aviv this morning. Israel's missile defense systems have been working overtime. The Iron Dome, Arrow, and David's sling systems have been intercepting an extraordinary volume of incoming threats, and then there is the shadow war being fought on the home front. The FBI this week confirmed that the man who drove a pickup truck into a Michigan synagogue was inspired by Hezbollah. In Austin, Texas, a lone attacker opened fire in an entertainment district following the American strikes in Iran. In Toronto, shots were fired at Jewish targets. Israeli travel advisories are urging nationals abroad to avoid Jewish institutions worldwide. The U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan put it plainly. So-called lone wolf attackers are not isolated. They are activated by terrorist propaganda. The question of how to counter that propaganda, especially online, is one that intelligence agencies across the Western world are grappling with right now. Here's where things get genuinely complicated. Because even as bombs are falling on Isfahan and missiles are flying toward Tel Aviv, there is simultaneously an extraordinarily complex diplomatic dance happening behind the scenes, and it is, to put it diplomatically, a mess. President Trump has now issued and then extended multiple deadlines for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The pattern is consistent and revealing. Trump issues a 48-hour ultimatum: open the strait or we will obliterate your power plants, your oil wells, and Karg Island. Then, hours before the deadline expires, he announces an extension citing good and productive conversations. He did this once, then he did it again. This week, he extended his deadline by another 10 days, saying talks are going, in his words, very well. He described Iran's negotiators as more reasonable. He posted on Truth Social that there had been very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. Iran's foreign ministry responded by saying, "There is no dialogue between Tehran and Washington. That is the gap we are dealing with. This is perhaps the most critical question of the entire diplomatic effort, and the honest answer from American and regional officials is, we are not sure." The Trump administration has been communicating with Tehran indirectly, through Pakistan and Turkey as intermediaries. 2 figures on the Iranian side have emerged as possible interlocutors: Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. Ghalibaf is an interesting case. He is considered a hardliner. He talks tough in public. But behind the scenes, he apparently gave the quiet signal to let certain ships pass through the Strait of Hormuz, the gesture Trump described as a gift. Trump read that as a sign he was dealing with someone who had real power and real pragmatism. But here's the problem. As multiple regional sources have told CNN, even if these figures are willing to talk, it is genuinely unclear whether they have the authority to make a deal. With Khamenei dead, the Iranian power structure is fractured. No one knows who has the final say. As one regional diplomat put it, no one can tell anyone today that whoever shows up to Islamabad has the power for the Iranian regime. Ghalibaf himself publicly rejected the negotiations this week, saying Iran could not be, quote, forced into submission. That same day, Trump said talks were going great and that Iran had agreed to most American demands. You can make of that contradiction what you will. The United States has presented a 15-point proposal to end the war. Iran rejected it on March 25th and issued 5 counterconditions of its own: an end to U.S. and Israeli attacks on Iran and on pro-Iranian forces in Lebanon and Iraq, mechanisms to prevent resumption of war, compensation for war damage, and, most provocatively, international recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. That last demand is, in effect, a non-starter for Washington. Recognizing Iran's sovereignty over an international waterway would mean accepting a permanent Iranian veto over global oil trade. The United States will not do that. Iran knows it will not do that, which raises the question of whether these counterconditions are a genuine opening bid or a face-saving way to keep the war going. Just today, March 31st, a major new diplomatic development landed. China and Pakistan have jointly presented a new peace initiative. Pakistani Foreign Minister Dar met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Beijing, and together they announced a 5-point plan calling for an immediate ceasefire and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. When asked about the initiative, Trump did not criticize it. He simply said the negotiations with Iran were going well. A source with knowledge of the situation told Axios that China had been helpful in efforts to reach a deal. China, as Iran's top trade partner and the world's biggest importer of Iranian oil, has enormous leverage in Tehran and an obvious economic incentive to end this war. The geopolitical irony here is striking. The United States starts a war in the Middle East, and China potentially ends it. If that happens, it will be one of the defining diplomatic moments of this decade. Here is something that has gotten less attention than it deserves. This week, the White House quietly walked back its demand that reopening the Strait of Hormuz was essential to ending the war. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said it was not a core objective. Secretary of State Rubio, meanwhile, continued to insist it would be reopened one way or another. These are two very different messages, and analysts are reading the White House's shift as a sign that the administration may be looking for an off-ramp that does not require Iran to fully capitulate on the strait. As one report in Time magazine noted this week, Iran's continued control over the strait could become one of the lasting geopolitical legacies of this conflict. There is a question at the heart of this entire military campaign that military strategists and nuclear proliferation experts are debating intensely right now, and it is worth sitting with. Does bombing a country's nuclear program make it less likely or more likely to eventually get a nuclear weapon? The instinctive answer is less likely. You destroy the facilities, you set back the program, you buy time. That is the logic behind Operation Midnight Hammer in June 2025 and behind Operation Epic Fury now. But nuclear security scholars raise a profound counter-argument. Professor Rupal Mehta of the London School of Economics, writing this month, argues that while the strikes have been tactically successful, they may have fundamentally rewritten Iran's strategic calculus. When a country is struck militarily, the shadow of military force is no longer a deterrent. It is a lived reality. And that lived reality can transform a country's desire for a nuclear weapon from an aspiration into an existential imperative. In plain English, by destroying Iran's nuclear program, the United States may have given Iran an even more powerful reason to rebuild it as fast as possible and never give it up, because a country with a nuclear weapon cannot be bombed the way Iran has been bombed these past 5 weeks. Iran still has nearly 1,000 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, believed to be buried deep underground. The IAEA has said there was no evidence of a structured nuclear weapons program when the current war began. But as the LSE analysis puts it, technology is a tool. Knowledge is a permanent asset, and that knowledge has not been bombed away. The administration's answer to this argument is that Iran will never get the chance to rebuild because the new Iranian government, presumably one that emerges from the ashes of the current regime, will not pursue nuclear weapons. That is a bet. It may be the right bet, but it is a bet, not a guarantee. Whether you are watching this from London or Lagos, Lahore, or Los Angeles, this conflict has implications for your daily life that go well beyond the immediate military action. Let us walk through them. Energy prices. Oil above $100 a barrel is not just a number on a financial screen. It is higher fuel costs for truckers who deliver your food. It is higher airline ticket prices. It is higher heating bills. It is higher prices for plastics and packaging. Virtually every sector of the global economy has some exposure to oil prices, and right now those prices are being driven by geopolitical uncertainty in a narrow 21-mile stretch of water between Oman and Iran. Shipping and global trade. The last oil and gas tankers that left the Persian Gulf before the war began are now reaching their destinations. From here on, unless the Strait of Hormuz reopens, the strangulation of supplies will worsen. Insurance rates for commercial shipping in the region have already skyrocketed. Some shipping companies have rerouted vessels around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, adding weeks and enormous costs to journeys. Regional stability. The conflict has touched Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, Azerbaijan, and Lebanon. France lost a soldier in a drone strike at a base in Iraq. 6 French soldiers were wounded. The war is no longer just between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. It is becoming a regional conflict with global tentacles. The Congress question. Back in Washington, there is a constitutional debate running alongside the military one. Congress never formally declared war on Iran. Democrats and a handful of Republicans like Representative Thomas Massie have questioned the legal basis for the operation. A resolution attempting to block the president from continuing military action was defeated in Congress, but the debate is very much alive. Massie made the pointed observation, if Congress wants war, the Speaker should hold a vote to declare it. The administration has maintained that the president has constitutional authority to act, but historians and legal scholars will be debating the war powers implications of Operation Epic Fury for years. So where does this end? Honestly, and I say this as someone who has spent days studying this conflict, nobody knows for certain. There are a few scenarios analysts are watching. Scenario 1, a deal gets done. The Pakistan-China initiative or some version of it gains traction. Iran agrees to halt enrichment, allows a monitoring mechanism, and reopens the strait in exchange for a ceasefire and some form of economic relief. The war ends with no clear winner, and both sides claim victory for domestic audiences. This is the most optimistic scenario, and right now it feels possible but not likely in the near term. Scenario 2. The conflict escalates. Trump's deadline extensions run out. Patience wears thin, and the United States strikes Karg Island, Iran's primary oil export terminal. Iran retaliates by mining the strait. Oil spikes to $150 a barrel or beyond. The global economy takes a severe hit. This is the nightmare scenario, and unfortunately the military posture on both sides keeps it very much on the table. Scenario 3. A managed stalemate. The military campaign winds down without a formal deal. Iran retains partial control over the strait. Some of its nuclear knowledge survives. The regime changes in form but not entirely in character. And in 5 or 10 years we find ourselves having a version of this same conversation again. Trita Parsi of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, one of the sharpest observers of U.S.-Iran relations, put the diplomatic reality this way. Trump is going to have to give something to end this war, and that is a very different position from where he started. Former U.S. Middle East negotiator Aaron David Miller went further. This war of choice has become a war of necessity. What is clear, and what history will record, is that the Middle East of March 2026 is fundamentally different from the Middle East of February 2026. The killing of Khamenei, the battering of Iran's military infrastructure, the disruption of global energy markets, the activation of lone wolf attackers across the Western world. These are not temporary developments. They are structural changes that will shape the region for a generation. If you found this analysis useful, if this helped you understand what is actually happening in one of the most consequential geopolitical events of our lifetime, please hit the like button and subscribe. We will keep following this story as it develops, and I will be back with updates as the diplomatic picture evolves over the coming days. As always, stay informed, stay analytical, and do not let the noise drown out the signal. I'll see you in the next one.